Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 2004, Ramblings, Genealogy, Thoughts and Musings. First of all, though, my apologies for being on late. I was halfway to the pet store to pick up Zeffy's food when I realized what the time was. I was like, thank goodness we record this. We just got back and here we are. So Zeffy's waiting for her food. We had to go get her some food that was gentle on the stomach. It gave her a little crunch because she's getting a little tired of quinoa and pumpkin, which is doing what it's supposed to do. But as soon as we put her back onto her regular dog food, we have issues starting up again. So we've got the same brand, but we got the digestive food blend to see how she does with that. I got to keep her. I have to keep her in the same brand of food for when we go down to New Zealand, because the two places that do the quarantines use the Royal Canin brand, and so we have to keep it within that. So we shall see. I have a feeling that there might be something off with the bag that she's been on, because the trouble started when we started that bag. And then, of course, she had her seizures, and then she started with the steroids, which makes it all worse. And, yeah, it just snowballed from there. But anyway, we've had a really good day. We've been out. We went over to the vets today, got her prescription refilled, and found out. And because of her refill, they had to take her weight to ensure that they were giving her the right dosage, because the dosage is based on her weight. And she had gone from 48.8 pounds down to 43.6 pounds. So she has released 5.2 pounds in the last 30 days. And I was like, okay, that's a lot to lose in the last 40 days, but with what's been going with her digestive system, I am not surprised. Yeah. So, which is good, because she's getting back towards that 40-pound mark, which to me, I was told to keep her at 40 pounds, and when she's at near 48, the vet said as long as she doesn't go 50, she's fine. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. But anyway, so here we are. So genealogy, rumblings. My stomach's rumbling, sorry. If you hear the googly noise, it's either me or Zeffy. So let's just go. We're just going to talk about some different ideas on genealogy and different things that have happened on the genealogy journey. Now, I've been researching genealogy for how long? Over 40 years. I was probably about 14 or 15 when I started helping my mum. I might have been a bit older when I started helping my mum with the research, because she was doing the family research. So I might have been a little older, but about 15 years. Yeah, that works. Sorry, over 40. It's over 40 years. Whatever way it is, it's over 40 years. So there's been a lot of change in the last 40 years since I've been doing research. We've gone from completely offline to having limited amount of records available online. And if you've heard me talk before, then you'll know this. But for those that haven't, all the records online that you can research online only represent about 5% or less of all available records that you can research. So that's just a small piece that's online, and there's millions and millions and millions of records online, and they represent about 5% or less of all the entire records. So you do have to get out there, put your feet on the ground, and start walking and start going visiting archives and societies and libraries and all sorts of repositories to find the information that you need to find, because not all of it's available online. So if you can't find it online, you got to go offline. But the thing I love about genealogy is it's a huge mystery. I love mysteries. I was thinking back to some of the books I used to read as a kid when I started learning how to read. My favorite books were those that involved mysteries. The Secret Seven, the Famous Five, both of those by Enid Blyton, great books. And then later on, I got into what was the action books that my dad was reading, like Wilbur Smith and Alistair. Is it Alistair MacLean? I think it's Alistair MacLean. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've read them. And then there was Robert Ludlum and all of those sorts of books that was espionage and mystery and thriller and adventure and excitement. And guess what? It's all in your family tree. All of those things, anything that you can, if you think about the different, with the exception of probably sci-fi and fantasy, But if you think of a lot of the genres that are out there that for reading, you've got romance, you've got adventure, you've got thrillers, you've got mysteries. All of those are in your family tree. Now, here's an interesting thing. One of the authors I followed has started is doing like a get to know the author thing on her Facebook page, and she wants people to submit questions. And so people are submitting the questions like, how much of your real life is in your characters? How much of you is in your characters? How much of your family members and friends are in your characters? And that was and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And she says, you draw from what you know. And it's like with genealogy, you start with what you know. It's a very similar thing. But here's the kicker, is that Mark Twain once said, and I'm paraphrasing this, is that truth is stranger than fiction. That's why fiction has to make sense. Because there's a lot of times you're out there and you're looking at this thing, you're going, that can't be true, that can't be right. But it's there in documentation that you can actually prove. And you're like, wow. And then you're sitting there going, even the best movie writer, the best script writer couldn't come up with that scenario. And I tell you, there is a lot of stories out there like that. And there's, a couple of clients that I've been searching on their records and stuff, and they've said, "Oh, this is what happened," or "This is what we know happened," or "This is who is in our tree, and we want to find out if that person is related to somebody famous, and this is what we know what happened over here, but we're not sure what happened prior to that." So we need to unravel that. And then you're busy pulling these little threads and unraveling the story. And the stories that come out, they just blow your mind. And that's what makes it so exciting when you're researching genealogy, is that you're finding story after story after story. And some of them are just like boring, but they're not boring because they're your ancestors. Your ancestors live fascinating lives, because when you put their life into the context of the era that they lived in, they had quite an exciting life. Yes, they may have been a farmer, but did they have the technology and the tools that we have today? No. What did they have to rely on? Pure strength and muscle and learning as they go and figuring it out for themselves. They didn't have weather forecasters, and when it came to harvesting the crops, they had to do it by hand until machinery started coming into place. And now a farmer can clear a field in less than 20 minutes or whatever it is these days, with all the different machinery and stuff. They just run down the aisles, and it can do so many rows at once, and depending on what they're picking, of course. But so harvesting time back in the 1800s and stuff was a big deal. It was a big event. And in some areas, neighbors would get together and they'll go clear the fields for one farmer. Then the next day they'll turn up at the next farmer's place and clear his fields. And they combined their strengths and went out there and helped pull in the harvest. And then they had these big harvest parties and everything else. And the women were there providing the men with sustenance and nutrition, by feeding them and making sure they stay hydrated and all that. They had no clue about any of that stuff back then about nutrition. We're feeding our men. That's it. And I don't think sandwiches were invented. Oh no, sandwiches might have been invented then, but they were giving them full meals to help keep their bodies going when they were out there in the fields and everything else. And when it came time to sowing, in some areas they all got together and they sowed this field first, when they sowed this one, and they got together, and because many hands make light work. And in some areas it was just the man of the house was out there in the fields doing it. His wife would be out there as well, but she still had the house to take care of and watch the kids and all of that. Some of them had farm hands that could come out and help as well. So there was a lot of struggles that people went through. And when you think about, it couldn't have been that difficult, you've got to look at the times. What tools and equipment did they have available to them during their lifetime? We can sit here at a computer, and I can sit here and record this, and it can go out and anybody can watch it. I mean, anybody anywhere in the world can watch it. That kind of sort of still blows my mind. But when you look back at genealogy, we didn't have that. They didn't have that technology back then. How did they communicate with each other? Handwritten notes. They actually sat down with pen and paper and wrote letters, or postcards when those came into effect. But they were writing letters to each other, and they would be hand delivered. If you were in society, they would be hand delivered. You'd pay the butler, or you'd get the butler or whatever to run over to so-and-so's house with the invitation or the letter or whatever. But things were written in hands, and they took days to get their mail. Not like these days. Although sometimes I feel like we're back then. But then you got to take into account what's going on weather-wise and everything else. That's, with all the weather going on. I was looking at USPS's news site the other night, and there were so many states listed that had had winter weather, severe storms, and that didn't even cover California with the fires. This was just based on severe weather, and it was like all the northern Midwest out to the East Coast, down the East Coast, and then there was, Texas was thrown. It was just like mind-boggling seeing all of these states that were listed, and you're going, we've got severe weather in these areas, so your mail may be delayed, even if you're not in those areas, and you can have perfectly good mail delivery. Your mail may be delayed because we may have to go through one of those weather-affected states to get the mail to you. So I'm just like, they didn't have that technology there. You had the Pony Express. They got on the horses and just ran those horses because the mail had to get through no matter what. Didn't matter what the weather was, the mail had to get through. And then you have these Pony Express stations where they'd come riding in, and either the rider would switch onto a fresh horse, or he would switch the satchel over to another rider, so you'd have a fresh rider and a fresh horse, and off they would go to the next Pony Express pot until they got to wherever the letters had to be delivered. And that still took days. You're talking horses running, and that still took days. And it's just fascinating when you go back in time. Like, you come across a story that might be in a newspaper, and you read it and you realize that this may be your ancestor. So now you go about proving, is that my ancestor that is in this? And then you do prove that is your ancestor. It's like, wow. So then you go and have a look at the history of that time. What was going on around that time when that event was going on? What else was going on that could affect your ancestors' lives? And put them into the timetable, put them into the timeline for your ancestors. And all of a sudden you've got this fascinating tapestry of life coming down from your ancestors. Because remember, you've got 256 great grandparents. So by the time you get back to that seventh, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. By the time you get back to the 10th generation, there's 256 people in that level of generation. Think about that. That's a lot of people. And I think as if you go back to 12 generations, there's 1 million people that came together for you to be here. I think that was the 12. I think it's at 12 generations that happens. That's a lot of people, and each of their lives are woven into this tapestry of life that all forms and follows, and because you're carrying a small part of your ancestors in you. It doesn't matter where you came from or anything else. You're carrying your ancestors inside you wherever you go. There are traits that have been passed down that they have proven can come down through genealogy, through DNA. But the DNA that you're carrying, that's ancient. If you want to think about it, that's ancient. And there's two chromosomes. Men only have the Y chromosome, and that's only passed father to son, father to son, father to son, all the way down. You can, and because there's very little change within that chromosome, you can actually trace it all the way back to where your Adam came from, your helper. Brain's frozen. Haplogroup came from, and then on the woman's side, you've got your X chromosome, which is passed mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter. But it's also passed mother to children, mother to children. But it's always passed by females only. But of course, the males get it too because they have both the Y and the X chromosome, and theirs is the one that decides what the children are going to be. So don't blame the woman, blame the men, because women have 2 X chromosomes, men have an X and a Y. So yeah, it's their decision. But anyways, and you can trace your haplogroup on the female line all the way back to Eve. My Eve starts somewhere in Africa. That's all I can tell. I can't remember the continent. Sorry, it's on the African continent. I can't remember the country within there. I know it's towards the east side of the continent, up in the northeast quadrant is where my Eve is, my haplogroup. So it's very interesting tracing all of that back. And now, and that's a new thing that's come along with this DNA, being able to test DNA to see who you're related to, but not how. The DNA will show that you are blood related. Your genealogy shows you how you are related. So it just makes it so much, it's just added another dimension. So first of all, you started off with people were writing down things at home. They had family Bibles, they had different ways of recording things. There was parish records before the governments all stepped in and said, okay, from this date forward, you have to be recording births, marriages, and deaths. And that sort of thing, whereas the parish records already had that kind of stuff in there, but it was baptismal records. But some parishes would write the birth date in the record as well. And sometimes they'll write the mother's maiden name in there, and sometimes they wouldn't, and all this sort of fun stuff. But in most cases, if the woman was married, the father would be named on the birth record. If the woman was not married, the father was not named. Think about that one. But, and this is why it's very important to look at everything. When you're looking at a birth certificate or a birth registration, look at everything. Who is on that page? Who is mentioned on that page? I had one client who had a grandparents who were never married but had two children, but had a couple of kids together. They were never married. They stayed together for like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years or something, had 2 kids, 2 or 3 kids in that time. But the father was never mentioned on the birth registration because they were never married. But he was mentioned on the birth registration, just not as the father. It had father unknown. And then it put in the name of the witness was the father's name. And it put, how did you know, and then they actually had a column asking how they knew about the birth and how they could be a witness to the birth. And he goes, I was present at the birth. So he was present at the birth of his children. And we're talking late 1800s. So it was very rare for the men to be in the room while women were giving birth. They usually got kicked out. But he said he was there in the room when the baby was born. And so he was the one that recorded it. And so you got a signature on there. You got his note on there saying that he was present at birth and all of that. So the father is mentioned on the birth registration, just not under the father column. So I thought that was an interesting thing to find out, and made it very interesting on some births, and finding some birth certificates and things that did not have fathers mentioned. Made it very interesting reading at times. And some of them would actually, some of the birth records that we have seen actually stamped bastard across the birth entry, the birth registration. They stamped bastard across there because the mother wasn't married at the time. So think about that one too. Whereas today, they actually have the option to name, here's the mother, and they have the option whether or not they want to put the father on there, whether or not they're married, it doesn't matter. Which can make for interesting things when some women do not mention the father on there, even though they're married to him. So, there's all sorts of things out there. Things have changed. Some things have never changed. Some things have never changed. And I think the thing that shocked me the most in doing my research was how many of my grandmothers throughout the years, or my aunt, those that had the status of aunt. So basically the females in my family tree, whether they're on the direct connect or they're on the side correct, how many of them had kids out of wedlock? And I was sort of like, wow. I didn't really, growing up, I didn't really hear of a lot of kids being born out of wedlock. But then when we started doing genealogy research, it was like all over the place. I was like, wow. And then finding out, there's adoptions in the family. This person here adopted this, this person was born to this woman, but because she wasn't married, an older sibling came in and adopted that child and raised it as their own. So I've seen that happen in some records as well. There's all sorts of incredible stories out there, and stories of bravery, stories of survival. They say survival of the fittest. Well, sometimes I wonder, there's a lot of challenges that our ancestors have had. Yes, we have challenges today. Yes, our ancestors had challenges today, and the challenges were related to the times that they were in and the events that they were going through, just like today. Our challenges are related to the times that we're in and the events we're going through. So it's interesting going back and reading some of their stories of some of the challenges. There's stories of abuse in there. There's stories of being kidnapped in there. There's stories of surviving wars. There's stories of heroism, overcoming the odds to help save a family or to help to save somebody else. There's Ziffy, stop eating the carpet. Hey, no, leave. Somebody's hungry. She just starts going and looking at the carpet. I don't know why. There's nothing over there. I should probably go back to that spot now. So there's all these different stories of adventure, of exploration, that you're going to come across as you're researching your ancestry. And you may be this is something I don't get. This one just absolutely puzzles me. It just puzzles me. There are people out there who absolutely love and adore history and will learn everything about a certain period of time. Like they're like fascinated with the different wars and things, and they do all this war modeling and everything else, and have their little war games and things going up. Yet they don't know if any of their ancestors were ever involved in any of those wars. They don't have no interest in family history whatsoever. And I'm like, but what if you found out that this particular one here was, your fourth great grandfather? No, I'm not going to bother. It just puzzles my mind. These people who are so interested in history, they're willing to learn all the world history about different events taking place, different wars, different natural disasters. They're willing to learn every single detail about that, but they won't stop and look at their family history to see if there is a tie-in to their ancestry to that particular battle that they're looking at, or that particular natural disaster. It just boggles my mind. I mean, our ancestors are all part of history. I found one of the ones I matched to through DNA, and we found out that she was on my maternal side, not my father's side, because Ancestry put us together on the paternal side. So we're like looking through all the records on the paternal side, can't find the connection. We still haven't found the connection. But as soon as I asked her a question about her mother's side of the family, boom, like that, it was like, I know exactly where you are on the tree. Well, not exactly, but I knew whereabouts she was on the tree. But one of the things we discovered when researching her paternal side is that she has like a third great grandmother that was killed during the earthquake in Napier in 1932. And, that's got, now you've got something that when you go to the memorial wall that they have there with everybody's names on it that were killed in the earthquake, now you have a reason to go. I went into DC, and one of my trips, when I first got to the States, I did a lot of sightseeing in DC. I went through a lot of the different Smithsonian museums. I walked around the memorials. It was absolutely awesome. And it came in handy later on when I was working in a hotel, sending people into the different, wanting to entertain their kids and things. But that's another story for another day. Anyway, so I go and visit the Vietnam War, and I'm just walking down this wall. I mean, if it's a massive wall, and you're walking down there, and there are just thousands upon thousands upon thousands of names on that wall. It was emotional. It hit me right here. And by the time I got to the end, I had tears streaming down my face just from all of these names on the wall. Yet, as far as I know, I'm not related to a single one of them. Can you imagine the impact it would have if I was related to somebody that was on that wall? How much more emotional that would be. And then I went over to the Korean memorial and had a look at that. And that's a really cool memorial to go visit in DC. And they had all the countries that were the allies of the United States that fought side by side with the Americans in the Korean War. And of course, New Zealand was there. So now I'm wondering, well, did I have an ancestor or a relative that fought in the Korean War? So that's another question that's on my list of many questions to go and find out. I mean, and because whoever designed these memorials that's just the impact that these walls have. These memorials have on people. And so now I'm sort of like curious, did I have somebody in the Korean War that fought in the Korean War? Now I'm going to have to go do some more research on the Korean War and see if I've got anybody in there. And but I know that when you find that little link to something in history, that part of history becomes alive for you because you have a DNA connection to that event. You have a physical connection to that event through your DNA. Somebody who fought I had my grandfather, his brothers, my grandmother's brothers, all were in the New Zealand Army during World War II, and they were all sent. I believe they were all sent overseas. My grandmother, she was holding at the home front here. She was in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. She would talk about her days in the war, not about everything. My grandfather wouldn't say a word. Never said anything. It wasn't until years later I found out what happened, and that explained why he didn't say anything. So I'm curious to go and see some more find out more about his service in the Royal New Zealand Army. And that's one of my things when I get back to New Zealand, I'm going to start researching is see if I can get hold of his service records, which you can, if you are a direct descendant, you can get hold of military records. So I'm going to see if I can get hold of his and have a look at those. But there's so much out there. There's so many stories. And when it comes to genealogy, it's just go out there and have a look and see what you can find. You know, if you've got sometimes if you have a pull, you'll feel it inside you. You've got a pull, like you've got to go to a place, or you got to go visit some place. You don't know why, but you need to be there, and it just pulls at you and pulls at you and pulls at you till you finally give in and go. And it could be that your ancestors are trying to tell you, you need to know about this. You need to know about this time. It's very important in our history that you need to know about this point in time. And that's what they're trying to do. Your ancestors are coming through trying to tell you, you need to go over here and you need to learn about this area. You need to find the history of this area because we had a big, important role in this area. So there's so much out there. And here's the real kicker is that as much fun as I am having and as much love of genealogy that I have, and I'm trying to do as much as I can within my own family tree and as much as I can helping clients, I know that this puzzle will never, ever be solved. It is the ultimate puzzle because it will never be solved. There are holes in research because of documents that have been lost. So how do you find those holes? You've now got to start searching around that information and area and time and try and pull the pieces together from other events and other records that are out there. But the direct records that you need may have been destroyed. So this is the ultimate puzzle, never be done, because there's no way you can track your ancestry all the way back unless somebody's had these records under lock and key and all the environmental stuff and everything else. There's just, yeah. But it's fun trying. But my goal is to do piece together as much as I can during this time, and to make the research for those coming behind me. Because remember, we do follow in the footsteps of our ancestors. So that my descendants family coming behind me will get to me and go, oh, look at all the stuff that she uncovered, and here's all the sources, and here's all the information, and and they've got a good head start on what they needed to know. So it's that sort of information, and it's just making that information available to them. And also I'm going to start writing about the stories that occurred along the way, some of the discoveries that we made and things like that. So we have those records there for future generations, because as my friend Francine says, she says, we are our future generations' ancestors. How are you going to leave the world for them? And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. We'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific.